And we're live.
Hello and welcome to another live demonstration. Today I want to show you pastels, soft pastels, pastel pencils and some hard pastels. So there's lots of different papers and surfaces to work on. It's sometimes quite difficult to find one you like. I'm using a traditional paper surface. This is the SAA practice paper. It's got a rough finish on one side and a really smooth finish on the other. This time I'm going to use the rougher finish because I quite like the texture coming through my painting, but that's just me. Okay, so to start with, I'm just going to use a darkish colour just to block out the shape. So I'm going to be doing it just in the middle. I'm not going to use the whole area. And I'm just going to think about my structure. And you'll see with soft pastels, these are the SAA soft pastels, which are the harder range of the soft pastel, but they put down lots of good strong colour really quickly and really easily. So the tree, and you'll notice I'm using the side sometimes as well as the edge. This just helps me not get really precise and overwhelmed with shapes. So I know there's a tree going that way. I don't want to make it too big. And there's a tree going this way. And pastel, bear with me because I'll probably get it everywhere. I tend to make a big mess when I'm using pastel. So pastel is a really nice medium because it allows you to put down colour really quickly, and you can create different textures. You can create really fine detail, soft lines, or you can make it quite textural. I'm going to make it quite textural because, again, I work quite fast and I just like to get things down and use the materials I have to create the marks. I'm using the image as a guideline, but it doesn't mean I fully have to follow it because, as I've said before, no one else can see what tree you're drawing. It looks like a tree. As long as you've got the right shape, they can probably recognise the type of tree, but they don't know specifically which tree it is. Unless it's a famous tree, then that you have to be a little bit more careful. So for me, I'm happy where I've put the trunks. I'm just going to block out where the leaves are going to be. And I've noticed with the silver birch, it has kind of draping leaves and has quite a number of gaps between the leaves, and you can see the sky behind it. It's also quite long-limbed towards the outer layers. Okay, so I just want to put in a bit of that background because I love this violet. I think it's heather in the mid-ground, so I want to make sure I put that in. Okay, so I've blocked that out. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to block out a bit of the background colour. And again, you'll see it's very loose. I'm not looking for detail at the moment. I'm just putting in colour. I'm helping to understand where my colour is going to be and what areas are which. And this sometimes looks a bit unnerving in pastel. It looks a bit, well, you know, it doesn't look like anything at the moment. But pastel is a lot about layering. A lot, you know, you put different layers on. So I'm going to add the sky. And you'll notice normally I have one or two colours. With pastels, you do tend to use a lot more different colours. So you have a 5. If you see the colour with the number 5 next to it, that's its true colour. That's the colour that gives a true colour. And what I mean by true colour is you'll often see, say, I think this is, I'm not sure what colour this is, but you'll see a French ultramarine, say, tint 5. That's the neat true colour. Then you'll see tint 8 or tint 3. So why, and they look very different. The reason is you have a tint is where they add water to, white to, and that you have the same pigment and they just add more white to, so it will change the colour that way. And then a shade will add more black to, and it will change the colour that way. And if you have a yellow, say, you have a lovely yellow tint 5, but add more black into it, it makes it a greeny colour, which is why you have to look and check on your colour chart what the colours are going to look like. Colour charts are always a good place to look at for anything, for pigments. They have details, and they're as true representation as they can be. So with this colour, I just want to block out the sky. Just add blue bits. And I'm adding plenty of pigment down because what I want is different textures. I want the sky to be nice and flat and smooth, and I want the trees and the leaves to have a little bit more texture. And the way I'm going to do that is by adding plenty of pigment down so I can push it into the paper and smooth out the areas. At the moment I'm going to just smooth them out with my hand to get some of this excess dust off, but later you'll see I'll come in and I will just use another tool just to soften and blend in. I mean, I could have put a layer on to start with, but I find that tends to make the next layer a little less harder to grip, especially when I'm trying to use the texture of the paper. So this is why I've left the area around the trees, because I want to be able to grip and keep the texture of the paper. Okay, I'm having to push the pigment into the paper, the pastel, because it's quite a textured feel, and you'll see I'm picking up some of the dust just so you'll see how far it actually goes. It'll go quite a long way. Okay, I'm happy with that stages. So the next stage I'm going to do, I'm not going to concentrate on tree because that's in the foreground, so that's probably going to be one of my last things. What I want to do is concentrate on the background, and I don't want to again overwork the background, so I'm going to do the same thing. I've put the greens on. I want nice soft shapes in the background. Those trees, yes, you can see them and you can see the detail on the photograph, but I sometimes think you need to just alter things a little bit as the artist. So what I'm going to do, I'm just going to keep the background quite soft because it will push the tree forward. So when you're working on a 2D surface, you're always trying to think about how can I make things foreground, midground and background. At the moment it still looks quite flat, but it will change when I start to put my tones in, my lights and darks. So at the moment that just looks like a smudge of background. I don't want to overwork it, but I do want to start to think about darker shapes. And I can see on my photograph behind this tree here, it's quite dark, and that will push it forward if I start to put some darks on. I don't want to put too many layers on because I just still want to keep it soft. But with pastel you can work really detailed, lots of layers, really fine, adding lots of softness, or nice and loose and textured, as I'm going to do. So you can see now, even adding those few lines, I'm starting to push that tree forward. And I'm just adding, I'm not worrying about where they're going, I'm just adding some shapes. I'm really going to concentrate on this area, so anything outside that I'm not overly worried about. But under the background trees and bushes will be dark. So I just want to show that it's darker while it's hitting the... Actually, I'm going to bring that down a bit more, maybe lower that. So I'm thinking about altering, looking, reviewing all the time. Maybe add a little bit of shape and texture. Just blodge it in, and you can see I'm actually doing quite well. I haven't got it in my hair or all over at the moment.
Not yet.
Not yet. I will, trust me. Okay, so I can work on that background again, but at the moment it's not pushing anything forward for me. So I'm going to start to work on the tree. Pick up the white. That's a grey. Pick up the grey, and you'll actually, sometimes you'll see I'll use both hands. That's just something I'm just thinking about. I'm doing something, and then I will do, I'm thinking of more thing than once, and I'll do it with both hands, but that's just me. Okay, so just putting some grey on, because this is a mid-tone. Most of the bark will be quite light, and I can bring that back. So I just didn't want full stark white to go on straight away. Okay. So with the tree, I want a little bit more detail than I'm having in the background, just to add a little bit more texture. Now with these long pastels, probably one of the first things I do is break it in half. So you have a nice long pastel, I'll break it in half. And there are a number of reasons for this. One is I find that's quite big to work from, and I like to use the side, but I also like to use the edge. So by breaking it, you get a nice, clean, crisp, fresh edge. So I will rotate the pastel as I'm working with it, just so I keep that edge sharp. Again, it still looks a bit smudgy and a bit random, but it will start to come together. It's usually in the last stages you'll see how things start to come together and develop. Okay, I'll work on that later. So now what I want to do is I want to start to put some greenery in. So I'm just going to add a different texture, which is pushing this on hard but dotting it around, so keeping some of that leaf shape. I'm just thinking about where I'm going to fill out the leaves, because it was done in summer, because the background trees and bushes are quite full. So you've got to think about having the same amount of colour on the leaf, on the tree in front. If you make the tree in front look like it's got autumn leaves and the trees behind have got summer leaves, it won't match. There's something will feel odd. Okay, so I'll do this, then we'll have a short break, and then I'll start to put some tones on and some darks and start to just build up a little bit of shape. But you can see how from something that starts quite rough and ready, you can start to build up, and that's just by layering and adding more texture each time. Just looking a bit too, looking at it, I can feel I've made a patch there, so I'm just going to bring them in together a little bit more and add a few more shapes. So as I'm doing things, I'm always reviewing, looking, thinking, is that shape working? What can I do here? Okay, so I think that's a good time for a break. Join me in a minute and then we'll start to add detail and we'll start to finish the piece off.
Let us bring out the artist in you. If you'd like to learn how to paint or improve your painting, the SAA, Society for All Artists, is here to inform, encourage and inspire you every step of the way. When you become an SAA member, you get so many benefits. including the free bi-monthly newsletter Paint, packed with inspiring step-by-step projects, fascinating articles, and detailed information to get your creative juices flowing. Discounts on over 13,000 art products featured on the SAA website and in the Home Shop catalogue, with free order line and free delivery in the UK mainland. A devoted SAA team on hand to answer your questions and give you the confidence and motivation you need to start painting and develop at a pace that suits you. Plus, a free welcome pack filled with gifts and practical help to get you started, as well as the opportunity to make friends with like-minded people.
Best thing about being a member is the inspiration from the magazines, to be able to purchase things at a very reasonable price.
Yeah, you get the reduction on all the materials, the advice you get.
I could shop from home.
It's a community.
It seemed like a very friendly sort of organisation.
If somebody's thinking of joining, don't spend too long thinking. Just join. They'll love it.
And we're back.
Hello and welcome back. So now, while you've been looking at the advert, I've been having a look and thinking about what to do next. I think I want to add some dark colour under the leaves, just so I can start to push this tree forward. So this is one of the dark pastels, fairly new to the pastel range, and it just adds some lovely dark tones. This dark green. And again, I want that technique, that little scribble dot kind of technique, because it works well for leaves. But I don't want to overwork. I just want to, you can see how adding on certain areas. What I'm also trying to do is push in some of the pigment into the texture of the paper. I like the texture here, but for the tree, I want to lose a little bit of it. And this is done by adding more layers. Okay, so you can see how that is starting to add character to this silver birch. I love the silver birch. I have one in my garden. I like watching the different seasons and the colours. And if you've got a tree like that, it's a great thing to do. It's something, you know, when you have artist block and you don't know what to draw, just draw your trees. Draw what you can see from your window, because it will change. Every day will be different. The weather, the light, leaves, all those different things that change, which you probably take a little bit for granted. But when you're drawing them, it's just a great observational skill to kind of, well, I know that shape. Well, look how it's changed. Look how the leaves fill in the areas. So I think that's starting to bring that forward. So I just need to work on these darker areas. You notice I'm working under, keeping some of that greenery on top, because this is where the dark will be. It'll be right in the middle, where the leaves are very condensed, and underneath where the light isn't hitting the trees. And you'll see these little marks, I think, are very much like the leaves you get. So I'm also trying to think of the shape of the leaves, and they hang down. They have a kind of a drooping feel. So this is why I'm working with this kind of mark, and most of my marks are looking downwards, working this way. I should have started from the top, because I don't want to lean on the page, but with my random brain, I've forgotten that bit. What I could do is use something like crystal paper, or I think it's called glycine paper, and I can lean on that if I want to go back into it. But because of the technique I'm using with this pastel, it's actually keeping my hand off the page, which is good. Right, so under here. And you can see how that's now filling out some of those little holes. And I'll show you what I want, how I can fill those in right at the end. Just adding So I think that's thrown it forward, definitely thrown that forward. I'll leave that for now. I can always go back into it. What I want to do is I want to add, there's still some light I need to add that, but I like to do that at the end because then I can think about the light as a whole. What I want to do is I'm using a pastel pencil, sharpened with a long point pencil sharpener, and you can see how long you can get. And I just now want to start to bring, trees are solid, so I want to just distinguish that these are a solid unit rather than the looseness of the leaves. I need to do that by really distinguishing these. So this is a nice colour. I'll need a darker colour later, but I just think this will bring out some. It's also, this colour's quite nice. It's a burnt carmine, and what it's doing is it's working well with the greenery. I could see the colour is making the other areas pink, which is another consideration when you're drawing, is how do your colours work together? If you have lots of colours that don't work together, that can, might have a beautiful composition, but it can, you know, make your work look a little bit unnerving, to be honest. But if that's what you're aiming for, great. But it is something to think about, some of your colours, and do how they work with each other. Okay, so I think that's fine there. I want to bring some colour into this foreground. Now, the reason I've chosen this colour is I've chosen this for a purpose, because in the foreground there's lots of nice sandy grasses. I don't need to do anything because the work's done for me. So I just want to add some of this pink. And again, I don't want to overwork. I'm just going to add a little bit of colour, because, you know, if I add colour and it just looks startling and doesn't work with the rest of the paper, it will just look odd. It will shine out. I know it's going to work because it works well with this colour I've put in here, plus it works well with the greenery. I'm just going to blend it. I was going to use my finger. I feel I need a little bit more control. Just blending it into the background, and now I'm going to bring, and you'll notice I'm going to change my different shapes and squiggle it around, which is really easy because that's what leaves do. So sometimes just the way you move your tools can really indicate the texture. What happens sometimes with pastel, and I can see it here, is you'll leave little halos around where the colours don't meet at the time. That's easily solved by just thinking about it, looking at it, and filling in those gaps. The pigment will move quite readily. If not, you just add a little bit more. You can see now how that's evened and smoothed the background leaves, and there's gaps here. Okay, so I know I want to just distinguish a little bit of texture, just a little dark. I don't want to overwork the background because I'll lose from the tree. At the moment, that tree it's been pushed forward, but not fully yet. So I'm struggling thinking about my foreground because the tree hasn't been finished. So I'm just going to, it's not the colour I look for, add some little speckles of light. And just there, you can now start to see, just adding these little texture and just spots of light. Suddenly, that's just pushed that forward. So it doesn't matter when you do it, it's just when you feel you need sometimes. For me, I needed something to help me move forward. And this is one of those things I needed just to see how the light would work. Right, this is going to have quite a lot of light on here. And what I'm doing is I'm making sure I'm pushing the pastel just to fill in some of those holes. Nice shapes there. Bring that down a little bit. Right, catch some of the top edges here. And again, I'm rolling my pastel because that helps to self-clean it as it goes around. Also gives me a sharper edge. The reason I changed hands there was that technique was making my hand cramp. It's always actually a useful thing to do, I don't like that shape, is change hands. And a lot of people will say, I can't do that, I can't paint with this hand, let alone change hands. But actually, you lose some of your inhibitions, and you'll find that actually you observe a lot more by changing hands, and you'll come out with some quite nice work. So sometimes I will change hands just when I feel things are looking a bit stale, or I'm struggling with something. Just change some of these, because at the moment they're quite long stripes, so I want to just alter that and change. There's nothing here either, which it needs a little bit of. Dark, so bring back some more darks. And so what I'm doing is now breaking up some of those areas I feel needs a little bit more work on the composition. Okay, so pushing into there. So I think I probably could overwork that area. I'm just going to work a little bit on the tree because I want to bring out the texture. This is a hard pastel, or sometimes called a crayon. It's soft pastel with a little bit of wax, which means it's not as blendable. But it's great for adding texture and detail over your soft pastel when you can't get such a hard edge. This keeps a nice crisp edge. Again, I've broken it to keep that crisp edge. So working on the trunks because they have that lovely texture. And I don't want to put lots of lines, lots of outlines. I think I need some more white. I think I've lost some of these white branches. And again, I'm going to go for a hard pastel because it gives me a little sharper edge than the soft pastel does. You can see there how that's bringing out. It's a beauty with pastel. You can work on areas, you can rework, go back in. So I said I wanted a smooth background in the sky, so I've got little gaps. So all I'm going to do is take some of this, I'm moving blue into the green because I don't want to contaminate. And you can see I can now just fill in some of these areas which I feel are just looking a little odd. And this is a colour shaper, so it's a nice rubber end, really easy to clean, and it just pushes that pigment with a little bit more control than you would have with your finger into those areas which you want covering. That worked quite well. Okay, so now I've done enough fiddling in the background, I'm just going to finish the foreground, and this is going to be quite easy because the colour's already there. I just want to add a little bit of colour into the foreground. I'm going to put some detail in, but at the moment it's going to look like a scribble. Bit of a dark. Because I'm going to use my colour shaper, and I'm going to use this to create some textures. So I'm using the pastel that's there, and you can see how I can get such nice sharp edges. So all I'm doing is using the... So if I'm finding this is a bit too random, because this is a foreground, so as much as you want it to be random grasses, you do need to think about it a little bit more. So this is where your work can slow down and you can just add those final textures. I'm going to just use some of the pigment I've got on here and just move it around here. You can see how that's picking up, and that's adding some textures, because that midground needs to be slightly darker. It's the light is hitting here. I'm not overly worried or thought about where the light is. It's more of the shape and using the materials. Again, I'm making that liney, so I just want to, I'm at a danger of overworking. So I'm going to stop. I think that looks okay. Just one thing I want to do, I know I've said stop, but I've lost some of that lovely light on there. It's better. Okay, so knowing when to stop is always quite difficult. So you can see there how you can layer, you can build up, you can have fun, you can be loose, you can be very soft in the background, you can be quite loose, or use different tools to make different marks. So I hope you enjoy it, and I hope you have a go and have a play with what you've got. Join me later in the week for another live demonstration.